Paul Madsen stood in his kitchen, the morning sun glinting off the Formica countertop he'd installed with his own 2 hands, and stared at the envelope that just arrived by courier. Heavy stock, big city law firm on the letterhead. The kind of letter that means trouble. He slid a calloused finger under the flap and unfolded the pages, his eyes locked on the line. $18,500, 0 cents per month in temporary spousal support. For a second, he thought it had to be a mistake, a bad joke. But it wasn't. Clara, his wife of 26 years, was coming for blood, and she brought lawyers. Paul didn't yell, didn't smash anything. He just sat down slowly in the chair he built back when money was tight and dreams were big. That's when it hit him. The woman who used to split cheeseburgers with him now wanted the price of a new truck every month after cheating, lying, and draining their joint account behind his back. He picked up the letter again, trying to understand how things got this far. This was the same woman who used to wake up with him at 4 a.m. to help load the truck before a remodel job. Now she was living like a CEO's wife and treating him like a tenant. Paul's phone buzzed. Clara's name. Again. Her 7th call that morning. He didn't answer. Not yet. Not until he was ready. Not until he had a plan. He'd built a company from nothing. He could rebuild his life too, just not with her in it. As he reached for the bourbon, one word looped in his head. Why? And then another, sharper, colder. Payback. He didn't want revenge. He wanted justice. And he was going to get it. Every last cent. There was a time Clara wouldn't spend $10 without checking with Paul first. They were a team back then, barely scraping by, but scraping together. In their late 20s, Paul drove a beat-up Chevy van and worked 18-hour days patching drywall and rewiring fixer-uppers, while Clara balanced invoices at the kitchen table, still finishing her marketing degree. Every dollar was earned twice, once in sweat and again in sacrifice. They shared one credit card and one dream, to build something real, and they did. Over 2 decades, Paul grew Madsen Renovations into one of the most trusted home restoration firms in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. By the time Paul was 55, they were doing 6-figure projects and had finally bought their dream place, a modest ranch with good bones and a big backyard. But something shifted when the money got good. Claire started hanging around a new crowd, executive wives she called them, women married to men in tech, finance, real estate. Every lunch came with new designer bags, every story with names Paul didn't recognize. Soon she stopped coming to job sites, stopped asking about the business, and started talking about yoga retreats and financial independence. One day, she came home with a Mercedes and claimed it was a reward to herself. Paul didn't say much, just kept his head down and worked. But the woman who once celebrated a night out at Chili's now scoffed at local restaurants and talked about Paris like it was Plano. At first, Paul blamed himself. Maybe he worked too much. Maybe he didn't show enough appreciation. So he suggested marriage counseling. Clara laughed. "We're not poor, Paul," she said. "We don't need therapy. We need a vacation." That's when he felt it, the gap between them wide and growing. She used to help him lay tile and now wouldn't touch a garden hose. It wasn't about the money. It was how the money had made her feel. Entitled, restless, above him. Paul didn't see it coming. He never expected that building a good life would cost him the woman he built it for. But now, looking back, the warning signs had been flashing for years. He just hadn't wanted to read them. It started with a phone call from Paul's accountant, Mitch Delaney, a no-nonsense guy who'd handled Paul's books since the beginning. "Paul," he said flatly, "you noticed $240,000, 0 cents missing from your accounts, or is that just me?" Paul had been knee-deep in a kitchen remodel that day, sleeves rolled up, plaster dust on his jeans. He thought Mitch was kidding, but Mitch didn't joke about money. They went over the transfers together. Amounts pulled slowly, in increments just low enough to avoid triggering red flags at the bank, Over 18 months, it added up to $250,000. "You and Clara make any big investments lately?" Mitch asked. Paul couldn't think of a thing. No new properties, no business expansions, no renovations. Just Clara's new lifestyle. That night, Paul asked her outright. Clara didn't even flinch. She blamed household expenses, claimed she'd moved money around for better interest rates, and said he never paid attention to the details anyway. He wanted to believe her, but something in her tone, it wasn't confusion or guilt, it was arrogance. Like she was daring him to dig. So he did. 2 days later, he sat in his truck outside a private investigator's office. Her name was Lena Hart, former FBI, not cheap. "Find me the truth," Paul said, "even if it wrecks me." A month later, Lena delivered a manila envelope thick with photos, time-stamped reports, and transaction records. Clara wasn't just lying, she was living a second life. Dozens of dinners, weekends away, and hotel receipts, all with Evan Stokes, a luxury car dealer who once subcontracted paintwork to Paul's crew years back. Evan, 10 years younger, Rolex wearing, all charm and cologne. The first picture showed them holding hands at a wine bar in Austin, another at a cabin retreat in Colorado. Paul remembered Clara saying it was a girls' trip. But the worst was the timeline. The largest withdrawals from their joint accounts lined up perfectly with each rendezvous. $4,500, 0 cents before Napa, $6,800, 0 cents before Miami, $10,200, 0 cents before the Aspen weekend. Paul felt sick reading it, not because she'd had an affair, though that burned enough, but because she had used his hard-earned money to fund it. She didn't just betray him emotionally, she stole from him, robbed him of trust, dignity, and 26 years of sacrifice. Paul sat in his truck with the photos in his lap, watching the Texas sunset dip behind the roofline of a home he'd built with his hands. Something inside him changed in that moment. The hurt was still there, but it was outpaced by clarity. Clara had crossed a line, and Paul wasn't going to let her walk away with the house, the business, and a check every month just because she wore a nice dress to court. She'd picked the wrong man to underestimate. Paul didn't get rich by being reckless. He built his life with patience, grit, and an eye for detail. So once the truth about Clara was in his hands, he didn't explode. He planned, quietly, carefully, like a contractor preparing for demolition. He made an appointment with Gwen Hart, a razor-sharp divorce attorney known for representing small business owners blindsided by messy breakups. Her office wasn't in a high-rise. It was a converted brick warehouse on the edge of downtown Fort Worth. Paul liked that. No fluff, no games, just results. He showed her the photos, the financial statements, and the lawyer's demand letter. Gwen raised an eyebrow. "She wants nearly 20 grand a month after cheating and siphoning off your accounts." "Cute," she said flatly. "We'll bury that." Together, they built a counter-strategy. Gwen advised him to move fast, but smart. First, Paul pulled exactly half of what was left in their joint account. No more, no less. It wasn't about the money, it was about the message. Next, he opened a new LLC in Florida under the name Madsen Coastal, tied to a contract he'd just secured to restore a historic marina hotel in Tampa. He'd already been planning to expand out of state. Now it gave him a legal reason to relocate. "Florida's laws are friendlier to folks like you," Gwen told him, "especially when the other party's been misbehaving." Gwen's final instruction: silence. No calls, no texts, no warning shots. Every interaction went through her. Paul blocked Clara's number. Let her wonder. Let her stew. He didn't owe her explanations. She'd spent a year treating him like a backup plan. Now she'd see what it felt like to be locked out. While Clara and her lawyer, Dennis Lowell, pushed paperwork demanding Paul continue funding her designer lifestyle, Gwen quietly filed a request to freeze assets pending financial misconduct review. And when Paul boarded a one-way flight to Florida, carrying copies of every document Gwen had asked him to secure, he didn't feel like he was running. He felt like he was reclaiming his name. He left a note on the kitchen counter. Not for Clara, but for himself. This isn't revenge. This is restoration. The kind of restoration that doesn't involve hard wood or paint. It's the kind that rebuilds a man's peace of mind. Paul wasn't going to be the sucker that wrote checks out of guilt while his ex played the victim. He was done letting her write the script. This was his story now, and he'd spent 26 years earning the right to finish it on his terms. 3 days after Paul touched down in Florida, just as he was walking the site of the marina restoration project with his new foreman, he got a surprise visit. Not from Clara, but from her brother, Jason. The two men had always had a quiet respect for each other. Jason ran a commercial real estate firm in Dallas, built his own success, didn't have time for drama. He showed up in work boots and a button-down, like he meant business. "Got a minute?" he asked. Paul led him to the back patio of the property, out of earshot. Jason didn't waste time. "You should have called me first," he said. "I told her to come clean months ago." Paul stared at him, arms crossed. "Then you know about Evan?" Jason nodded slowly, eyes low. "I didn't want to believe it. But yeah, she lied to me too." Jason explained that Clara had come to him weeks ago asking for a short-term loan because her lawyer said Paul might freeze the accounts. She played the victim, claimed Paul was being paranoid, aggressive, but Jason had seen the signs for a while. New jewelry, mysterious trips, money gone without explanation, and when Paul's name hit his caller ID today, he knew it wasn't just some misunderstanding. It was a full-blown reckoning. Paul told him about the photos, about the missing money, about the lawyer's $18,500, 0 cents a month insult. Jason just shook his head. "She's lost the plot," he muttered. "She doesn't even realize how far she's gone." It wasn't an apology, not exactly. But in that moment, Paul saw something better. Validation. Even her own blood couldn't defend what she'd done. "Tell her everything goes through Gwen from now on," Paul said firmly. Jason gave a short nod. "Will do." Then, before he left, he said something Paul wouldn't forget. "She always thought you'd forgive anything. I guess she finally found your line." Paul watched him walk off the property and realized this fight wasn't just his anymore. People were seeing the truth. Claire's story was unraveling, and she'd sown every thread of her downfall herself. By the end of that week, Paul knew staying in Dallas would only make things messier. Clara's lawyer, Dennis Lowell, had started calling Gwen nonstop, pushing for emergency hearings, sending veiled threats about assets concealment. Clara, meanwhile, had taken to posting cryptic, sympathy-baiting quotes online. Things like, "Sometimes the people you'd take a bullet for are the ones pulling the trigger." Paul didn't bite. He had something better than online pity. A plan. Gwen filed the necessary documents to establish Paul's primary residence in Florida, backed by his new contract, newly formed LLC, and an airtight relocation letter. The judge assigned to the case, Judge Donna Eldridge, had a reputation for sniffing out manipulation, especially in divorce proceedings involving businesses and long-term marriages. "We wait for the right moment," Gwen told him. "We strike from position, not emotion." That moment came 2 days later. Paul, standing in the check-in line at Dallas-Fort Worth International, confirmed his one-way ticket to Tampa. While Clara was still refreshing her email for a reply he'd never send, Gwen hit the court with a volley of filings. Emergency motion to freeze marital assets, evidentiary documents outlining Clara's financial misconduct, and a formal notice requesting a hearing on the grounds of fraud and infidelity. The timing wasn't just legal, it was tactical. Once Paul was officially in the air, the jurisdictional filings locked into place. As the plane lifted off, Paul sipped water and stared out the window, watching the city he'd helped build fall away below him. It didn't feel like retreat. It felt like liberation. Clara had always assumed he'd sit back and take it, play the part of the tired middle-aged man too worn down to fight. But she didn't know this version of him. This version had nothing to lose, an illegal bulldog watching his back. Midway through the flight, Paul's phone, on airplane Wi-Fi, buzzed with an email from Gwen. Subject: filed and confirmed. Attached were scanned documents, the asset freeze, the evidentiary brief, and confirmation of the court date. 11 days out. The best part? Dennis Lowell hadn't responded. He hadn't even seen it coming. Gwen's note at the bottom read, "Judge Eldridge will eat this up. Rest easy, Paul." Then for the first time in over a year, he did. As the Gulf of Mexico came into view, Paul leaned back, closed his eyes, and smiled. The battlefield wasn't in Dallas anymore. It was in courtrooms and contracts now. And in that arena, Paul was finally holding the hammer. By the third day in Florida, the silence was over. Clara's desperation hit like a flood. First came the texts, long, rambling apologies and half-truths. Then voicemails, each more frantic than the last. "Paul, this is all a misunderstanding. I didn't know Dennis was asking for that much," she pleaded in one. In another, her tone turned accusatory. "You froze my accounts. I can't even buy groceries." Paul just shook his head. This was the same woman who once dropped $9,000, 0 cents, on a weekend in Vail without blinking. Groceries? She'd never once budgeted in 26 years. Gwen had warned him this would happen. "Once they lose access to the money, the tone always changes," she'd said. And she was right. Clara's entitlement gave way to panic. She didn't expect the courts to take Paul seriously. She didn't expect him to leave the state. And she sure didn't expect a paper trail that detailed every dollar she'd drained. What had started as arrogance was now unraveling into fear. One message in particular stood out. Clara's voice was raw, almost broken. "Paul, please, we need to talk. I made mistakes, but you're punishing me like I'm a criminal." Paul listened to the end, then deleted it. It wasn't punishment, it was accountability. If anyone had been punished, it was him. Years of loyalty repaid with lies, theft, and betrayal. Then came the final sign things were shifting. Gwen forwarded a message from Dennis Lowell himself. "Mr. Madsen, in light of new information, my client is open to negotiating a more reasonable temporary support arrangement." Translation: they were cornered. The judge had reviewed the filings. The asset freeze held. The hearing was locked. Now they were trying to negotiate before things got worse. Paul didn't respond. He didn't have to. Clara had made her choices. Now the only thing left to do was let the consequences catch up. The morning of the hearing, Paul wore a clean gray button-down, no tie, no flash, just like always. Gwen met him at the courthouse steps with a thick leather folder and a knowing look. "Stay quiet, stay calm. Let them hang themselves," she said. Inside, the courtroom was colder than he expected, both in temperature and tone. Clara was already seated, dressed like she was headed to a cocktail party. Pearls, heels, designer handbag resting on her lap. This Lowell looked rattled, flipping through papers he should have read days ago. Judge Donna Eldridge entered the room, a woman in her early 60s, with sharp eyes and zero tolerance for nonsense. After the opening pleasantries, Dennis made his pitch. Clara was a devoted wife, unused to hardship, and needed substantial support to maintain her standard of living. That's when Gwen stood up, cool and composed. She handed the judge a binder marked Exhibits A-H, filled with bank transfers, vacation receipts, and PI surveillance reports. "Respectfully, Your Honor," Gwen said, "this isn't a woman seeking fairness. This is a woman funding her affair and luxury lifestyle with marital assets, while contributing nothing to the household or business for over 5 years." Judge Eldridge didn't say much at first. She read, slowly, page by page. Then she looked up. "Mrs. Madsen," she said, "have you been employed in the last 5 years?" Clara stammered, "No, but I was building my own brand." "What brand?" the judge asked. Silence. "Have you made any effort to seek work since filing for divorce?" Another pause. "Not exactly." When Gwen laid out the timeline, the money transfers matching Clara's trips with Evan Stokes, The photos, the emails, even screenshots of texts. There was no room left for spin. The judge's voice turned steely. This court does not reward financial misconduct. Your request for spousal support is denied. Mr. Madsen will retain temporary residence in the marital home. You, Mrs. Madsen, have 30 days to vacate. Paul didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He just exhaled. 26 years of building, sacrificing, and surviving. And for once, the system had actually sided with the man who played it straight. As they left the courtroom, Gwen whispered, "That went better than expected." Then her phone buzzed. "It's Lowell. Wants to talk settlement already." Paul looked back at the courtroom door. Clara hadn't moved, still frozen in that chair, surrounded by designer baggage, literal and otherwise. Justice wasn't loud that day. It was quiet, steady, and final. The hammer had dropped, and for once, it landed on the right side. A week after the hearing, Paul sat on the back deck of the Florida property, legs kicked up, coffee in hand, watching the early sun rise over the water. For the first time in over a year, the silence didn't feel tense. It felt earned. Gwen had just texted, "Settlement talk starting. They're coming in low. We're holding the line." Paul smiled. Clara and her lawyer were scrambling to salvage whatever they could. But the judge's ruling had flipped the board. No spousal support, no access to his accounts. And the house, legally his, for now, and likely for good. Another message pinged through, this one from his sister, Katie. Auction raised $33.00, K for the shelter. Clara's purses were the first to go. Poetic justice. Paul chuckled. Not out of spite, but out of closure. He didn't need revenge, just resolution. And that was happening, slowly, surely, and fully in the open. Even more surprising was the message from his daughter Megan, who hadn't taken sides at first. "Proud of you, Dad. You kept your dignity. Let me know when you're back. I'll bring the boys by." That one hit different. All Paul ever wanted was to build something that lasted. His business, his home, his family. He couldn't save the marriage, but he'd saved his integrity. He looked out at the dock, where his new crew was already unloading gear for the marina renovation. A new project, a new start. He drained his coffee and stood up. He wasn't running anymore. He wasn't reacting. He was rebuilding. But this time, for himself. Clara could keep the lies. He had the truth, the tools, and now a clean slate. Paul stood at the edge of the dock, breeze in his face, phone buzzing in his pocket, with one final missed call from Clara. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. That chapter was over. He watched the sun climb higher over the marina, casting fresh light on wood he'd soon restore with his own hands. For years, he'd fixed broken homes for other people. Now he'd finally fixed his own life. Not with nails or plaster, but with boundaries, truth, and resolve. As the first hammer swung on the new job site, Paul smiled. He wasn't just back, he was rebuilt. The story of Paul Madsen is more than a divorce drama. It's a wake-up call. It's about what happens when a hard-working man gives his all, only to be betrayed by the person he trusted most. But it's also about what happens next. Paul didn't fold. He didn't lash out. He got smart, got help, and took control. The lesson? Never assume quiet means weak. Protect what you've built. Document everything. And when the time comes, stand your ground with dignity and facts, not anger. For every man who's poured years into building a home, a business, or a family, this is your reminder. Your value isn't just in what you earn. It's in how you carry yourself when things fall apart. Don't let anyone rewrite your story. Paul didn't. He rebuilt. And you can too. If this story hit home, like the video, subscribe for more real stories of justice and redemption, and share it with someone who needs to be reminded they're not alone. Every man deserves to be heard, and every fight for fairness deserves a voice. Let's keep that voice strong.